No matter how desperate any news agency is to get you to click, it can never lie to you. It can't mislead you. I mean, it physically can, obviously, but it's not allowed to under the most basic rules of journalism. Unfortunately, we live at a time in which news agencies do that all the time anyway. And now there's a new big example, one that should draw the attention of everyone who cares about the truth and crimes against humanity. It involves one of the most serious topics there is, slavery, and a powerful global organization. The misrepresentation of this story is so important to look at because it's more than a journalistic fiasco. It may be the biggest sign yet of a damaging, nonsensical thought process that leaves out facts, logic, and reason. It's a thought process that's overtaking the media and much of our society. There is so much to this. It involves Vikings, the British asking an African nation to stop slavery. Yep, and more. I'll break it down for you ahead. And speaking of crimes against humanity, there is a very popular myth about the Holocaust that was made up by a Nazi hunter. Yep, one of the good guys. It was even in a presidential declaration. News organizations treat it as a fact. I'll explain why this is the episode to tackle that myth. Meanwhile, Trump is continuing his pattern of firing cabinet officials way faster than presidents generally do. The media is not telling you about the lying track records of replacements. The new head of Homeland Security has already been featured on this show for spreading lies in the media. When reporting on him, the media should tell you that. Plus, the amazing Marian Anderson, historic civil rights figure and opera singer, coming up today on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. So great to have you here. My name is Josh Levs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact checks the news. You can learn about me at my website, joshlevs.com. I spent 20 years in big mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN, did a lot of fact checking. But the media itself gets things wrong all the time. Big mainstream news organizations. And no one is fact checking them until now. We recently had the 100th episode. A bunch of people sent in messages to celebrate it. Some were recorded and some were written. I'm spreading these out across multiple episodes since there were so many. This one is from Daniel. It is beautifully written. He writes, "In a world where misinformation and misleading, harmful rhetoric travel at the speed of a click, your show has shown me that the truth can still shine through. Never have I felt the content I'm digesting has done a better job of delivering facts plus context. Thank you and congrats. You're doing the world a great deed." Oof. I never enjoy reading these things myself. It's awkward, but I am so appreciative, and I have told folks I will get their messages in. Thank you to Daniel and all of you who follow this show, who support this show. You might know, along with this show comes a newsletter packed with links, facts, and more information. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. It's free. You should absolutely get it. And the best way to support this show is to become a paid subscriber. Then you get extra content, social media stuff, annotated transcripts, and more. Plus, paid subscribers are the driving force in determining topics for this show. They are the first people I turn to. I look at what they're asking me about. It is amazing to see who is sending things in. These are people of all backgrounds, all political persuasions, just any human being who cares about the truth. Let's jump into this. This was a headline from the New York Times sent to me by a listener.
U.S. rejects vote to recognize slavery as a crime against humanity.
That is what the headline said, but that is not what happened. This isn't complicated or up for interpretation. It's a fact. That did not happen. So, the New York Times is not only lying about what the United States just did, but it is putting that lie in the headline, which is what by far more people see, and they grab screenshots of it and send it all over social media. The Times knows this. Here is what actually happened. Ghana put forward a resolution. It wanted to declare specifically the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity. Ghana wanted to pick one horror of humanity's past and name it the single worst thing that humanity has ever done. Everyone who is committed to truth and justice knows that it makes no sense to do that, ever. The world is filled with so many horrors, and you don't get competitive or even comparative about which is the worst. People have been subject to all sorts of unthinkable things throughout history, and to this day, including hellish terror. People have been enslaved by various empires for millennia. But the New York Times was not done there. Its subheadline says the United Nations resolution was led by the president of Ghana. Israel and Argentina also voted against it. Nowhere in this entire article does the Times tell you what actually happened. All of the European Union and a ton of other democracies, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, also refused to vote for this. They didn't have the nerve to vote against it officially, so they abstained. But governments went on the record saying what's wrong with this, criticizing it, making clear that they do oppose it. Here is a little piece of what the UK said. This is Ambassador James Kariuki, the UK's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations.
Firstly, the UK is firmly of the view that we must not create a hierarchy of historical atrocities. Doing so simplifies the complexity and vast scale of suffering endured in different contexts. It risks diminishing the experiences of communities whose trauma and suffering was felt just as strongly. No single set of atrocities should be regarded as more or less significant than another.
A representative from Ghana tried to argue that you can somehow simultaneously call the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity and not be creating a hierarchy. There was no logic to what he was saying, and the news should tell you all of this. Here's why this example of media failure is so important on a broad societal level. Victim narratives are plaguing people's minds and preventing them from learning facts or looking at situations with any kind of rational mindset. It's been a while since I've talked about this here, so I'll lay it out briefly. Here's what's happening. On the right, victim narratives are designed around you being the victim. You are a victim of immigrants eating your pet dogs or whatever insanity far-right groups are making up any given day. You are a victim of all these school librarians trying to turn your kids trans. And what they do is they find one librarian who says or does something crazy and pretend that that's happening everywhere. So there's that kind of victim narrative. But victim narratives are just as dangerous on the left. Here's how they go there. You are privileged. In order to be a worthy human being, you must stand for real victims. And the progressive activist speechifying at you gets to tell you who the real victims are, and you may never question that in any way, or you will be excluded in every way. This is what's happening. It's all about victim narratives. And the existence of this vote at the United Nations, the fact that more than 100 countries voted for it, shows that they are willing to play right into competitive victim narratives. That's where we are right now. It's a way of thinking that is being spread by the media all over the world. In order to fix any problem, we have to put facts first, always. The fact is, history is filled with horrors. Understanding that other horrors took place does not take anything away from the horror of the transatlantic slave trade and its fundamental role in the building of America. The Smithsonian put out a video a few years ago. The title is "The Indian Ocean Slave Trade Was Likely Bigger Than the Atlantic Trade." I'll put this video in the newsletter for you so you can check it out. The Indian Ocean trade was dominated and run by the Arab Islamic Empire, which is an umbrella term for multiple Arab Islamic empires that cross more than a millennium. In this clip from the Smithsonian, you'll hear Professor Bernard Freeman of Seton Law School, along with the narrator.
The Indian Ocean slave trade is probably the oldest of the slave trades and transported more human beings.
Exports of the enslaved from the Indian Ocean to the Muslim world grew exponentially after Arab traders won control of the Swahili coast and sea routes in the 8th century.
Many Muslims plundered and captured Africans, Indians, Southeast Asians, usually non-Muslims.
You may have heard me talk about this in the past. The Arab Islamic Empire killed tons of people, especially people of Israel, Hebrews, Jews, and enslaved particularly women and children. That then fed into the transatlantic slave trade. The Arab Islamic slave trade built the infrastructure and what historians have referred to as the supply chains, but that is such a disturbing term when we're talking about human beings. Anyway, it built those things that the people who ran the transatlantic slave trade later used. This is just one example of a horror in history that gets almost no attention. Media could take this as an opportunity to educate people on other crimes against humanity, like this. As I was researching this, I came across a video from something called Al-Muqaddimah. What interested me here was that it had more than 1 million views. I usually don't care about that stuff, but in this case, it should be a signal to the media that there is an audience for this information. Anyway, this video discussed how in 1842, the British asked Morocco to stop slavery.
The Sultan replied that he did not do anything about it because it had been the norm since the time of the sons of Adam, and no sects of Islam are against it. Hence, he will not permit anything that the Quran forbids, and will not make anything unlawful that the Quran has allowed. In the Sultan's reply, we see the simplest justification, or at least excuse, for almost 1,300 years of slavery in the Islamic world.
As I looked into all this for you, I learned things that I didn't know. There's a historian named Raymond Ibrahim. He is a guest contributor to the Hoover Institution. I came across a conversation that he had about this on something called the Winston Marshall Show.
A lot of the Viking raids was to feed the Arab slave emporium because there was such a demand for white slaves. And all those slaves, most of them would be sold down through the rivers of Russia to the caliphates, the Abbasids, for example. Parents write to me about school books, textbooks, and social science books. What I just described to you doesn't even get any mention. You just get one sentence about how Islam spread through trade in the Middle East, and they won't tell you the Middle East was so Christian before that.
This recent UN vote was an opportunity for the media to introduce people to things they don't know, to teach things that aren't in our books. If the media instinctively looked for facts plus context, it would stop and think in the face of a vote like this at the United Nations. And it would use the opportunity to introduce people to other horrors they have not heard about. More on that coming up. But first, this is not the only thing the New York Times did wrong in this story. The Times also said something false in here about Trump, which is so messed up in every way because it helps him make his arguments about fake news. Don't give him fodder.
And now I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today, Josh Levs.
We are blessed to be able to have a speaker this evening who speaks with a lot of heart.
An outstanding author, a principled and groundbreaking journalist, a really engaging speaker and thinker.
Broadcaster, journalist, and host of They Stand Corrected, the podcast fact-checking the news. Thank goodness.
Josh spent 20 years reporting for NPR and CNN, where he developed unique expertise on nonpartisan fact-checking. He has been called Truth Seeker in Chief.
Josh has won multiple Peabody Awards, Murrow Awards,
and awards from the AP, from the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Association of Black Journalists, and more.
His book, All In, was published by HarperCollins and won the Nautilus Gold Award for promoting positive social change. He has spoken to the United Nations, Congress, Google.
And of course, I think is very cool, won a debate at Oxford.
He launched his podcast and newsletter called They Stand Corrected to provide listeners with the truth in a world of disinformation.
Clearly, he is a much-needed voice during these crazy times.
It's my pleasure to introduce Josh Levs to you today.
Please welcome.
Please join me in welcoming Josh Levs.
I love getting out there and meeting people like you. It's such a great opportunity to answer your questions and discover more about listeners to this show and potential listeners too. If you're interested in working out something in person or online, there's a form at my website, joshlevs.com. That's JOSHLEVS.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. Just click bookings. Here is something else the New York Times said in its disastrous report on a recent UN vote.
Policy groups, human rights organizations, and academics have accused President Trump of minimizing Black history in the United States. He has accused the Smithsonian Institution of focusing too much on how bad slavery was, and not enough on the brightness.
Not enough on the brightness? The what? There is no brightness in slavery. This Times report put brightness in quotes. I saw that and I thought, if he had said that about slavery, I really think I would have heard about it. He has said a lot of insane things, but it turns out, no, that is not what he said. And again, the Times knows this. Here is what the Times itself reported last year.
President Trump accused the Smithsonian Institution on Tuesday of focusing too much on how bad slavery was and not enough on the brightness of America.
The brightness of America. Here's what Trump actually said. This was in August, a post he put on his inaccurately named platform, Truth Social. He was complaining about the Smithsonian. He said it's out of control, where everything discussed is how horrible our country is, how bad slavery was, and how unaccomplished the downtrodden have been. Nothing about success, nothing about brightness, nothing about the future. That is what he said. But telling people that would not feed the rage of the New York Times core demographic. That is what the New York Times wants to do with its false headlines and misleading claims. These reports allegedly go through multiple layers of editing. The Times has $2.4 billion in annual operating expenses, according to the latest available figures. Yet somehow it doesn't have anyone making sure that it does the basics of its job. By the way, I mentioned recently that the Times had increased its subscriptions. I did not realize at the time, but have learned since, that a very large amount of that comes from games. So when the Times shows off about its subscriber numbers, that is context. A bunch of reports say a third of Times subscribers don't pay for news. So people are getting games, recipes, one of their other products. I have said many times everyone should drop paid subscriptions to the Times, and I'm referring to the news stuff. Get it for free by becoming a paid subscriber to my newsletter. I share the secrets to getting that and most other major news agencies for free legally. Save your hard-earned money. As I talk about grave crimes against humanity, some of you may be wondering, is he going to mention the Holocaust? The Holocaust was the fastest, most systematic genocide in history. The term genocide was coined in the wake of the Holocaust to describe what had happened. It was also the largest killing ever of a minority group. And there are also other genocides throughout history. See, these are just facts, not rankings. Since the term was coined, people have looked back and said we can describe certain other mass killings as genocides, like one over many years in the Congo, starting in the late 1800s. Millions of people were killed there. Armenia in the early 1900s. Estimates there vary between 600-something thousand and maybe even 1.2 million people killed. More recently, Rwanda and again Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is related to the genocide in Rwanda. When you learn all this, know all this, it makes it even more despicable how people are now falsely using the term genocide for something that is not one. I won't tread back through what I've reported on this show. I'll just mention that even Amnesty and the nation of Ireland, in their efforts to try to get powerful groups to call Israel's responsive war a genocide, they acknowledged in writing that the definition of genocide doesn't even allow for that. Anyway, today is the day to tackle a popular myth about the Holocaust because This is my last episode before a remembrance date called Yom Hashoah. It's coming up in just a few days. There are, of course, tons of myths about the Holocaust that were created by anti-Semites. Crazy stuff like it never happened. The Iranian regime is really big on that, along with far-right and far-left people here in the United States. There's also the myth that Israel was somehow suddenly created after the Holocaust for European Jews, which is not remotely what happened. I've covered that in previous episodes. By far, the largest population in Israel is composed of Jewish people who had to flee the hell of living in Arab and Muslim nations and their pogroms, which included rapes and slaughter, inspired by a mix of Islamism and Nazism. There's also the myth that Arab residents in that region were oh so welcoming to Jewish refugees. I've covered how Arab leadership and Arab people in that region were big fans of Hitler and part of the Nazi movement. There were Islamist units in the Waffen SS, and every group in the world that participated on the Nazi side of World War II paid a price for it, which is one of the reasons the media pretends that the Arab population in that region was not among them. Anyway, there is a very different myth created by a man who was known as a Nazi hunter. Tons of media report this myth as though it's true. You often hear this on local news. Here's one from station KSFN.
It's been roughly 80 years since 11 million people died during the Holocaust, including 6 million Jews, and to this day, survivors are sharing their stories.
This claim that 11 million total people were killed in the Holocaust is very popular. It came up during Trump's first term when his White House put out a statement about remembering the Holocaust that did not mention Jewish victims at all. Here's an exchange on CNN at the time.
When it was pointed out to Hope Hicks, one of the communications staff, she then directed to a link online of the Huffington Post that said, yes, 6 million Jews were killed, but also 5 million other people, including gypsies and communists and anarchists and trade unionists.
Well, have you ever heard of a Holocaust remembrance message from the White House that didn't mention Jews being killed?
Chris, it's obviously odd.
That was the New York Times' Thomas Friedman at the end. He, of course, did not take that opportunity to set the figure straight. No one did. There were not 11 million people killed in the Holocaust. Where did that figure come from? In this case, it was from someone who wanted to educate people about the gravity of the Holocaust. Simon Wiesenthal, who was a Holocaust survivor and became a famed Nazi hunter, he made up that number and admitted it. The awesome Deborah Lipstadt, who was President Biden's special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, has written about this. Simon Wiesenthal was convinced, and he was probably right about this, that people wouldn't care about 6 million Jews. But if there were 5 million non-Jewish people, then maybe people would care. Of course, that whole thing backfired. Now that figure is often brought up by haters who say, oh, those Jews are trying to make the Holocaust all about themselves. The 11 million figure made no sense at the time. The Nazis were meticulous and organized in their slaughter. And the Holocaust is the most detailed recorded horror in human history, with all these records and names and proof. Also, people who survived concentration camps, when they heard that figure, they were like, what are you talking about? We were way more than 6/11ths of the people in those camps. But people believe the 11 million thing. President Carter included that figure in a statement back in 1979. Ever since, some people have taken it as a fact, including the media. I found this from NPR. This is such a sign of the media. They ran a correction that was wrong. Here's what I found on their website. This is from 2015. An earlier version of this story stated 6 million people died in the Holocaust. It is estimated that at least 11 million people were killed, 6 million of whom were Jewish. That's what they wrote. But no. Part of the trick here is that many people were never taught the difference between the Holocaust and World War II. The Holocaust was the systematic slaughter of 6 million Jews, and there were other people killed as well. Roma people, also known as Romani, some people who were identified as gay, some with physical disabilities, for example. There's been tons of research on this. The number is nowhere near that giant figure. It could be hundreds of thousands. Maybe it could be even a couple million. So what you often hear now is people say 6 million Jews and millions of others, just to be safe. Meanwhile, the Nazis did kill millions of other people in the war. The world wars led to mass deaths, and the Nazis were incredibly evil. They killed millions of Soviet POWs. Also, I should note, tons of people died from killings by the Axis and Allied powers, tens of millions. Short version here, no, there were not 11 million people killed in the Holocaust, and a lie invented for even perhaps positive reasons can be just as dangerous and problematic as any other lie. The media should check this stuff before echoing it. All of these things should be studied. No one needs to rank the gravest crime against humanity. Heading into this break, I have a piece of music for you, a historic recording of Marian Anderson, a Black American contralto who stood up to racism. Here she is singing a song that fits right into this episode and is timely for multiple reasons. I mentioned how timely that music is. As this episode comes out, it is Passover, which is all about that story. One more thing for you today. President Trump is continuing his pattern of firing cabinet officials way faster than other presidents have in general. There's a chart showing how much more upheaval his administration's experienced than average. I'll put that in the newsletter for you. He let go of Christine Noem, who was Secretary of Homeland Security amid all the battles over immigration. The person Trump has put in her place is Markwayne Mullin. He was a senator from Oklahoma. Big media are doing what you'd expect. They're having these predictive conversations like, what might be different now? Here's a typical example. This one's from CNN.
Markwayne Mullin's been on the job for a week and a half now, and he's already rolling back some of Kristi Noem's policies. Do you expect a real shift in how DHS operates, or is it more sort of a change in style, a new face?
Well, for me, and I think many people who are in the immigrant community, advocates, there's a wait-and-see approach right now.
Super helpful. Here's an idea. How about if the Fourth Estate, the media, takes a moment to tell you whether Mullin has a history of telling the truth? The answer is no. He was on this show. In fact, if his name sounds familiar to you, that might be why. He was even in the Media Fail Awards episode as an example of people lying about cuts to the federal workforce and the actions of DOGE, which was the system, I guess that's the best way to put it, that Trump set up with Elon Musk to get rid of tons of people from the federal government. They made wild cuts that had no rhyme or reason and created all kinds of disasters within the government. Here is a clip from an episode in which I talked about that. This clip starts with then Senator Mullin on NBC's Meet the Press.
Within only 4 short weeks, we've already identified over $55 billion of waste and fraud.
No, they haven't. And at this point, when this interview took place, there was already a lot of reporting showing that this alleged Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has no clue what it's cutting or how much money it's actually saving. Lying in the media seems to be a prerequisite for getting a high-level position in this administration. I still don't understand why people want these positions so badly. Are people so stuck on the idea of having a big title for a little while, seeing their names in the media or whatever, that they're happy to deliver these bald-faced lies? It's the same thing media figures are doing. They lie and get fans because of it, and that leads to more money and influence and what is, in that sense, considered success, even though it is its own profound failure. And along the way, they wreak havoc on our society. We cannot work together on anything successfully without putting facts first. As always, I want to know what you think. Send me your thoughts, ideas, links you want me to fact check. There are two great ways to reach me. The best is through the newsletter, and the second is through a form at my website. Just go to joshlebs.com and you will see the form right there. I see every message and love hearing from all of you. Remember to subscribe, rate, and review. Those are simple, free actions you can take. They just take a minute, and they trigger the algorithms to tell more people about this show and the fight for truth. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.